You're listening to the Cam Books podcast with your hosts, Cameron and Trisha McManus. Welcome back to the Cam Books podcast. This is Canto 5 of Dante's Inferno. Just a caution to our listeners today, this episode contains, we can use the word entanglements now, and we all know what that means.
Yeah, because in this circle, we're going to encounter the lustful, but Dante actually sees the danger in this not as something to do with the body, but as something to do with the heart. For him, it's really about a feeling, right, a certain emotional thrill. And for that reason, this canto isn't really graphic, whereas many medieval treatments of this are pretty graphic. Dante's unusual in that way. But yeah, be forewarned, we are going to be discussing entanglements and betrayal. And for that reason, it is a somewhat more adult canto than some of the other ones.
Right, nothing graphic.
No.
Yeah.
And Dante's, as we'll see, he's quite unique in the medieval world for having such a non-graphic discussion of lust, and it's actually one of the more valuable things about this. He's not doing it just to be tame. He has a real reason for it. He gets something about lust that a lot of people, both in his own age and our own age too, miss. So before we get into it properly, I want to talk a little bit about just where we are physically in hell here, because the opening can get a little confusing. So you recall, we went through the gates of hell. We saw those neutrals, those people who tried not to choose. They're kind of an exceptional case in hell because they're there simply because they're universally despised, so they don't get a proper spot in hell. Then after that, we went into the first circle of hell, but that too was a unique situation because the first circle was limbo, and those people there had not committed any sin and we're not really particularly suffering. So when we enter the second circle, we're now beginning to enter what we might call hell proper. And the pattern that we'll see here will start to repeat. So we'll see 9 circles altogether, and the lower down we go, the more awful the punishments are, and basically the less good the false goods being pursued are. But I think with that, we can get into it.
Canto 5, the second circle, the wanton, Minos, the infernal hurricane, Francesca da Rimini. Thus I descended out of the first circle, down to the second, that less space begirds, and so much greater dole that goads to wailing. There standeth Minos, horribly, and snarls, examines the transgressions at the entrance, judges, and sends according as he girds him. I say that when the spirit, evil-born, cometh before him, wholly it confesses, and this discriminator of transgressions, seeth what place in hell is meet for him. It girds himself with his tail as many times, as grades it wishes it should be thrust down.
Okay, so what we're encountering here is King Minos. Those of you who have heard of the Minotaur, Minos is his father. It sort of seems like an odd thing because he appears to be almost in a, judge-like role. He's kind of deciding where the souls in hell should go. This should seem surprising to us because this is, kind of a pagan figure, and it's almost a good office. Well, Dante takes this actually out of Virgil's poem. One of the reasons Virgil was so popular among medieval Catholics was that he was almost a Christian pagan. So in the other great pagan epics, when the hero descends to the underworld, basically all the good and the bad people are there together, and they just kind of float around as shades. But Virgil had this idea that there needed to be some justice in the afterlife, and he puts King Minos there, basically judging people based on how they lived their lives and sending them to an appropriate reward or punishment. So Dante takes this idea, makes Minos into this sort of half-demonic figure. He's actually got like a snake's tail that he's wrapping around himself. And when the sinner comes to him, he wraps the tail around himself a certain number of times, and that's the number of this person's circle, and then, off he goes. And we recall there's a justice element to this for sure, But Dante was very careful to introduce in those earlier cantos, the souls very willingly go to those circles. No one's dragging them there. It's where they want to go.
Always before him, many of them stand. They go by turns each one unto the judgment. They speak and hear, and then are downward hurled. O thou that to this dolorous hostelry comest, said Minos to me, when he saw me, leaving the practice of so great an office.
So Minos begins to speak to Dante, and this is a familiar pattern. We saw Charon did this too. He's noticing that he's alive and kind of complaining about the situation. I do just want to pause that it's very interesting that he refers to hell as sort of a hotel. There's a bit of an irony in that, but this concept has influenced, I strongly recommend, if you've not listened to the song Hotel California, very deeply inspired by this text, I believe.
Look how thou enterest, and in whom thou trustest. Let not the portal's amplitude deceive thee, and unto him my guide. Why criest thou too?
So what Dante's saying here is that the guide is Virgil. So Virgil replies, and as before is going to explain to Minos, get out of the way, we're here, get used to it.
Do not impede his journey fate ordained. It is so willed there, where is power to do. That which is willed, and ask no further question. So
Virgil has an interesting description, actually, of heaven. It is willed where there is power to do what is willed. That's how he understands heaven, where when God wants it, it occurs.
And now begin the dulcim notes to grow. Audible unto me, now am I come, there where much lamentation strikes upon me. I came into a place mute of all light, which bellows as the sea does in a tempest, if by opposing winds is combated. The infernal hurricane that never rests, hurtles the spirits onward in its rapine, whirling them round and smiting, it molests them. When they arrive before the precipice, there are the shrieks, the plaints, and the laments. There they blaspheme the puissance divine. I understood that unto such a torment the carnal malefactors were condemned, who reason subjugate to appetite.
Okay, let's pause on there. So Dante first starts by describing just what he sees. And the pattern in the Inferno is that he'll always see the fate, the punishment, the awfulness first. And then as the canto goes on, he'll come to discover who actually is subject to this punishment. Now, the third thing that we want, okay, well, what does the punishment mean? What do we take away from it? Dante will almost never describe explicitly, but that's why the Dante Daily will be so important. That Dante wants us to kind of wonder at what's going on first, connect who it's happening to, and then kind of when you walk away from the text, that's when you think, well, why might it be that loving this thing looks like that visually for all eternity? So what he's identified here is a hurricane, souls getting tossed around by the wind. And then he just comes to understand, as he puts it, the carnal malefactors. So he's using some euphemisms here, but basically those who are putting the desires of the flesh above reason. And that's really key. They subjugate reason to the appetite. We'll understand more of this punishment as we go through, but that's the first thing to really keep in your head. People who are here have decided that their appetite, that is really to say their feelings, are more important than their reason.
And as the wings of starlings bear them on, in the cold season in large band and full, so doth that blast the spirit's melodict. It hither, thither, downward, upward, drives them. No hope doth comfort them forevermore, not of repose, but even of lesser pain. And as the cranes go chanting forth their lays, making in an air a long line of themselves, so saw I coming, uttering lamentations. Shadows borne onward by the aforesaid stress, whereupon said I, Master, who are those people whom the black air so castigates?
One thing that's really interesting to note here is that Dante compares these people to two different types of birds, and they're not birds that we think of negatively. I mean, if you think of starlings flying around, they're kind of a romantic sort of thing. And as we'll see, that's really central to his point. The circle of lust is not going to have much to do with the body. It's going to have an awful lot to do with your feelings.
The first of those of whom intelligence thou fain wouldst have, then said he unto me, the empress was of many languages. To sensual vices she was so abandoned, that lustful she made licit in her law, to remove the blame to which she had been led. She is Semiramis, of whom we read, that she succeeded Ninus, and was his spouse. She held the land which now the Sultan rules.
So this is the first of many figures Virgil is actually going to describe to Dante. These are people famous for subjugating reason to this pleasure, this passion. So the first is Semiramis. She's an empress who, according to legend, basically made various unnatural and depraved acts legal in her law because she herself wanted to do them, and that was essentially what went on. They mentioned the Sultan now rules her land because it's actually been conquered in the back and forth wars with Saladin, so Saladin now has control of that territory.
The next is she who killed herself for love and broke faith with the ashes of Zacchaeus.
So this person is not named, but this is Dido. This is actually one of the main figures of Virgil's own poem, the Aeneid. So Dido falls in love with the main character, Aeneas, and they have a bit of a relationship, but it ends tragically when he leaves her, and she, before doing what Virgil describes, swears eternal hatred for her people on Aeneas's people, and this for Virgil is the origin of the Carthaginian War.
Then Cleopatra the voluptuous.
Cleopatra probably does not need much introduction, but she's famous for having carried on various entanglements, shall we say, with Caesar, with Mark Antony, and many other figures.
Helen I saw, for whom so many ruthless seasons revolved. So
this would be Helen of Troy, famously the face that launched 1,000 ships. She is her capture basically was the cause of the war between the Greeks and the Trojans.
And saw the great Achilles, who at the last hour combated with love.
So Achilles is a big hero in Homer's epic, but about this, a Greek and Trojan war. Scholars are not exactly sure why Achilles is here. One of the difficulties is that Dante didn't actually have access to Homer. He only knew about this book because Virgil wrote about it, so it's really hard to guess why he thinks of Achilles as a lustful figure. There's a lot of possible reasons, but we'll leave it aside.
Paris I saw, Tristan, and more than 1,000 shades did he name and point out with his finger, whom love had separated from our life. After that I had listened to my teacher, naming the dames of eld and cavaliers. Pity prevailed, and I was nigh bewildered.
We want to pause on this reaction. The figures all listed here, really with the exception of Semiramis, are all really positively well-liked figures, not just in the pagan world, but even in the medieval world. They're the admired characters of these books. So part of what Dante is kind of reflecting on is that, these are people I really deeply admired. I thought that they were incredible, the people you want to aspire to, and yet this is what they've come to.
And I began, O poet, willingly speak would I to those two who go together and seem upon the wind to be so light.
So Dante here sees a particular couple that are sort of joined together and fly about in the wind, and he wants to talk to them in particular.
And he to me, thou'lt mark, when they shall be nearer to us, and then do thou implore them, by love which leadeth them, and they will come.
A really interesting line of Virgil's here, and this will begin to open up for us the real lesson of this canto. He says, call on them by the love which leadeth them, and they will come. We're starting to discover what the nature of this wind is.
Soon, as the wind in our direction sways them, my voice uplift I, O ye weary souls, come speak to us, if no one interdicts it. As turtle doves, called onward by desire, with open the steady wings to the sweet nest, fly through the air by their volition borne. So came they from the band where Dido is, approaching us athwart the air malign, so strong was the affectionate appeal. O living creature, gracious and benignant, who visiting goest through the purple air, us who have stained the world incarnadine. If were the King of the universe our friend, we would pray unto him to give thee peace, since thou hast pity on our woe perverse.
So one thing that's really shocking about this, these are the first properly damned souls that Dante speaks to. They don't sound like what we'd expect. They don't curse his name. They don't say they hate him. They don't, tell him to, I guess they could tell him to go to hell, but he's already there. They speak quite positively. They say, if God would listen to our prayers, we would pray for you because you've been so kind as to bring us down here. So there's something quite likable about this couple, and that's going to be a key point that we'll tie together at the end of this canto when we talk about the Dante Daily.
Of what it pleases thee to hear and speak, that will we hear, and we will speak to you, while silent is the wind as it is now. Sitteth the city, wherein I was born, upon the seashore, where the Po descends, to rest in peace with all his retinue. So,
I'll jump in now and just tell us who these people are. This is a couple, literally joined at the hip. The wind has paused so that Dante can talk to them. So they're Paolo and Francesca. Now, Dante actually met Paolo before his tragic end, so it's going to be a lot easier for us if we just know the story. So Paolo and Francesca were married to different people. In fact, Francesca was Paolo's sister-in-law. She was married to his brother, but they fell in love and began an entanglement. The brother discovered this entanglement and killed them both, and I believe was himself executed afterwards, although I'd have to check on that point. So that will help us understand what she's talking about. That's why she's saying we stained the world incarnadine and so on. So these are not mythological characters. Dante actually really knew at least one of them. But their story, partially because of how Dante tells it here, but also partially just in general, it's considered a very romantic story. They're almost the Romeo and Juliet of the 14th century, right? A very tragic love story that everybody loves to hear about. And that's who we're encountering here.
Were they famous, or he just knew them personally?
I think both. Dante, moved in big circles. So this was in Italy at the time a very famous story, like a real-life Shakespearean tragedy, of course. Shakespeare doesn't live for a few centuries after this. But, yeah, they were well-known outside of the story. That's why Dante doesn't give us a lot of details. He just needs to kind of hint at who they are. His readers will very well know this story.
The readers of his time.
Yes.
Okay. Love, that on gentle heart doth swiftly seize this man for the person beautiful, that was ta'en from me, and still the mode offends me. Love, that exempts no one beloved from loving, seized me with pleasure of this man so strongly, that, as thou seest, it doth not yet desert me. Love has conducted us unto one death. Cain awaiteth him who quenched our life. These words were borne along from them to us.
So what's really interesting here is how Francesca uses the word love. For her, it's a force. It's a feeling in the heart that just overcomes you. It exempts no beloved from loving. It seized her with pleasure, and it seized the other guy too. Loved, conducted us, literally led us to this death. When she says, Cain waiteth for him who quenched our life, think like the city of Cain. What she's getting at is that this is where we went, and the one who killed us, he's going to be a little lower down because what he sought was our death. But what we begin to see here is that basically the souls that are in this circle are not just in here because they've decided that their body's pleasure is more important than anything else. They're here because they have a distorted concept of love. They've taken love to be their highest good, and they're pursuing that for all eternity. And as we'll rapidly come to understand, the hurricane is what they mean by love.
Love is the feeling as the highest good, rather than love the person as the highest good.
And that really is what Dante sees as dangerous in lust. That although, we're in a high up circle in hell, so the things that we see below us are worse sins in the sense that they are further removed from God, they have less of the taste of goodness in them, and so forth. What's more dangerous about this circle is that because it's high, remember hell's a funnel. It's higher, so it's wider, and we begin to see why. It's really easy to imagine yourself wanting to do this for all eternity, even though the souls here aren't happy. It's anyone who's ever felt that thrill that Francesca is to describe in a minute will easily see how a soul might be deluded into thinking that feeling, I want to just prolong that for eternity. That's heaven. But really Dante's point is that it's this, but we'll go further and see.
As soon as I had heard those souls tormented, I bowed my face, as so long held it down, until the poet said to me, "What thinkest?" When I made answer, I began, "Alas, how many pleasant thoughts, how much desire, conducted these unto the dolorous pass."
A really key point for us to know is that Dante didn't just write this poem. He wrote other poetry, and he even wrote some romantic love poetry. That poetry uses words very much like what Francesca uses here. Love is a force. It just rushes over you. It overwhelms you. It seizes you and leads you where it will. So he's not just thinking, the poor dears. What he's seeing is that, this is kind of what I think love is.
So he's seeing him, he's reflecting on himself, or reflecting on his old way of thinking and realizing the error in it.
Dante, the author, is reflecting on his old way of seeing love. Dante, the character, remember that, he started out in the dark wood. The whole point of this journey is to get him to repent from some of these views. So what he's kind of identifying now is part of why he needs this help. What he's seeing in this circle is, this is exactly how I think about love. It's this force. You just have to surrender to it, and that's the end of it. But
he's getting to that place now where he's reflecting on, this is how I could end up here.
Yeah, and that's what that pause is, and it's what Virgil's kind of trying to draw out of him. We'll get a lot of these pauses, and they often indicate a little spiritual progress for Dante.
Mm-hmm. Then unto them I turned, and I spake, and I began, "Thine agonies, Francesca, sad and compassionate to weeping make me." So he's saying that. He's feeling sorry for her.
Oh, yeah.
"But tell me, at the time of those sweet sighs, by what and in what manner love conceded, that you should know the dubious desires."
So what he's asking her is, can you tell me, how did it happen? Like, how was it that you two decided to give in?
And she to me, "There is no greater sorrow than to be mindful of the happy time in misery, and that thy teacher knows."
The teacher she refers to here is Virgil.
"But if to recognize the earliest root of love in us thou hast so great desire, I will do even as he who weeps and speaks. One day we reading were for our delight of Lancelot, how love did him enthrall. Alone we were, and without any fear."
So I'll put in here. So she was with Paolo. They had not yet gotten to an entanglement, and they were just doing what people in those days did for fun. They were reading poetry, and it was poetry about Lancelot. Now, those who don't know the story, I'll explain really briefly. Lancelot was the greatest, and in some ways, until this moment, most loyal of King Arthur's knights, but he carries on an affair with Guinevere, Arthur's wife and the queen, and that affair is ultimately the undoing of the Knights of the Round Table.
If you've ever watched Camelot, it's that song, or ever heard that song, If ever I would leave you.
Actually, this is, if I can recommend in addition to Hotel California, that's another song that I would say is deeply in this tradition. If Ever I Would Leave You is Francesca's exact idea of love. And once you get this, you hear it, like, this is not a medieval idea of love. This is the modern idea of love that's communicated to us in music. It's a force, just give into it.
Mm-hmm. And I think whoever wrote the music to that is so clever because it's so beautiful. It actually kind of takes you in. We'll play a clip of it. But basically, when you listen to it, it's like, oh, this is such a beautiful song. And listening to it without the context of Lancelot singing to this woman who is the wife of the king.
And the king is his best friend.
Who he is the best friend of. You wouldn't it almost betrays the senses.
In that song, they've kind of already succumbed to the temptation. It's basically his refusal to repent.
To fight. Yeah, it's his refusal to fight against himself. Although he's saying the words, if ever I would leave you. In reality, I should leave you, but I don't want to because my feelings for you are so great. So I was disappointed to find out that song was what it was, but there you go.
Well, most people are when they hear Lancelot's story, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's such a shame. But it's one of those cautionary tales, right? And here we are with Dante telling us, hey, listen, this is deep.
And of course, we can imagine how Dante, the character, feels here because he's learning what really started the affair. We were reading poetry about love, and this is just the sort of poetry Dante wrote before this.
And that's what I love about our Catholic faith, that we're given in good formation to guard our hearts, to guard our eyes, what we consume, what we read, what we watch, how we speak, and not to be automatons, but precisely to avoid falling into something that fools you, that it's a slippery slope. You almost think you're not doing anything wrong, that how could something bad be this good? But it's not. It's really a disguised evil, a really, really insidious thing.
Yeah.
Where am I?
So we're at full many a time.
Okay. Full many a time our eyes together drew that reading and drove the color from our faces. But one point only was it that o'ercame us, when, as we read of the much longed-for smile, being by such a noble lover kissed, this one, who ne'er from me shall be divided, kissed me upon the mouth all palpitating. Galietto was the book, and he who wrote it. That day no farther did we read therein.
So a lot in here. So she says...
She's confessing.
It was in that moment, right? They read about this beautiful moment of poetry. There was the smile and the truest lover and the kiss. Well, in that moment, this one, right, her lover, who will never be parted from me, and we can see why. I mean, because she's pursuing that. She wants that forever. He kissed me, and that was the moment. That name Galietto, we don't want to pass over that. Galietto, it's an Italian form of the name of a character in the King Arthur story. When Guinevere and Lancelot carry on their affair, Galietto is her servant. He kind of arranges for the meetings between them. So that line, she says, Galietto was the book, and he who wrote it. She's not saying that's the author. She's kind of saying, yeah, this book that we wrote...
He made way.
It's just on that point you said. The book had the same role in our affair as this guy had in Lancelot and Guinevere.
Okay.
So she's kind of saying the book was like the servant, the go-between, and so too was the poet, right? Guilty along with us.
And all the while one spirit uttered this. The other one did weep so, that, for pity, I swooned away as if I had been dying, and fell. He's so weak. And fell, even as a dead body falls.
Yes. There's going to be many Dante faintings.
Oh, Dante.
Now here he's got a reason. Like, he's not going to do it every canto, but here, I mean, he's implicated.
He's done it pretty much almost every.
Well, here he's implicated. He wrote books like this. Like, what he's realizing is that it's probably some of these souls are here because of something I wrote.
Oh, he's guilty.
Yeah. So I want to start by mentioning the Dante Daily. The explanation will take a few pieces, but stay with me. The Dante Daily, the real thing we should take away from this canto for our own lives is that sin disguises itself as heaven. So there's a few ways. Consider first what's going on here. So we have a bunch of souls that are lustful, and their punishment is not something carnal that we might expect, but basically that they are battered around in a hurricane. But there's more to it, right? They're battered around in a hurricane, and they're actually joined to the other person. Mm-hmm. So what we can kind of see as what's kind of going on here spiritually is this. They've kind of taken either this other person or perhaps the feeling that this other person produced in them, the moment of that kiss, shall we say, prolonged for eternity. Kind of what Dante's saying is this. Think about this will be more for our adult listeners, but think about the first time you felt that kind of a romantic thrill, right? The person that you like, held your hand for the first time, or you had that first hug or that first kiss or something like this. It's not so much about the body, it's just an emotional pleasure. What Dante's kind of getting at is that thrill, more than any carnal thing, is really what's dangerous about lust. Because we can mistake that thrill for the highest good. We can mistake it for heaven. But the reason it's not can be found in that image of the hurricane. That feeling is really pleasant because it lasts for about 2 seconds. But you can see why someone might want to prolong that feeling forever. One way to kind of read this canto, this punishment, is, well, what if you really could prolong that feeling for all eternity? Well, it would be just like this. You'd never have a moment of peace. It would be like constantly moving, being battered around, just surrendering to the passion forever. It maybe feels good if you do it for a second, but if it's your entirety for the rest of your life, it would be a restless, peaceless, painful existence. And I think that if you really think about what that feeling feels like in your body, it would be too much if you prolonged it more than it naturally occurs on Earth.
Each time he chats with somebody, it doesn't sound like they want to leave.
No.
I almost imagine, people who would be in that place as like, oh my goodness, you're so lucky. I want to get out of here. Please find a way for me to get out of here. Is he doing that on purpose to say that these people understand that they are fully stuck here forever and are just in it? Because I don't know, I would imagine more complaining.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that I think that is something Dante wants to emphasize, that in a lot of medieval, this is going to be a really unfair overgeneralization, but we do need to know it for later canto. Medievals really cared about justice. So in a lot of the conversation about hell, something we'd be as moderns a little embarrassed about, right? Like taking pleasure in those people who are bad are finally getting what they deserve. That was, within reason, considered a pretty healthy way to think about things in medieval times. And it's often, if you think about, what a poor peasant might think about the, the lord who's oppressing him and stealing all his stuff and harming him, you can kind of get it. So what Dante's really trying to get at here is that, although there might be something in wanting to take pleasure in justice finally being done, he's saying that, hell is not just a place of punishment. The people who are there, although they are not happy there, that's the key point, they're not enjoying hell. They do want to be there. It's a real choice, and it's a permanent choice. Right. They don't want to undo it.
It's amazing that they don't regret it. Like, I so imagine, obviously this is just Dante's version of this, but I would imagine them regretting the choice because that would hurt more. Mm-hmm. Right?
So you would think, but I think especially when it comes to romantic love like this, and I have to actually put it that way, like, I'll put it this way. Paolo and Francesca, the wind that's beating them all around the circle of hell is pretty much what most Disney movies mean by love. It's very much that same kind of thing. It's the force.
But aren't they, without saying it maybe or revealing it so explicitly, suffering?
Oh, of course they're suffering.
Okay.
Yeah, that's her point.
So then maybe what I said, there is a regret, right? There's a regret in having chose this.
Yeah, there's a kind of regret, but it's not to the point that they are willing to let go of this thing that is their highest good. Because she notes that, like, there's nothing worse, she says, than remembering happy times when you're in sorrow. But in a sense, she's choosing the sorrow because the sorrow is at least with him.
Do we ever get at one point throughout the Divine Comedy a moment where Dante explicitly says how they end up there? Like, does God give them that ultimate choice in the moment, or has he already said that?
So yeah, okay, I see what you're getting at. This is actually a pretty open, as far as I understand it, point in Catholic theology. What the medievals and the moderns will agree on pretty much is that hell is this permanent, unrevocable choice to separate from God. I don't know if this is what you're asking. What is sometimes a little tricky is that medievals generally saw this choice is made in life and that when you die, you just kind of carry on.
Oh, I see.
Moderns have begun to and I mean, they're not. There's no consensus on this, but there has sometimes been like a question of, well, do you get one last chance? Like, let's say you die while doing some horrible sin. Will you go before God and get a chance to repent of that, and only then will you finally go on down? I think this is a very relevant theological question, but it's not one that medievals really asked. And I think for Dante, really what he's interested in is, look, some people do make this choice in his mind. And he wants us to see why it is they don't want to let go. I probably use this.
So you're saying he doesn't explicitly talk about it?
Yeah, it's just it didn't really come up until the modern age. For the medievals, they had no real problem with the idea that basically it's hard to know why. It might have been that they thought that people wouldn't change their minds.
Where did the idea that when we die we're played back a movie of our life?
That's in traditional medieval theology. That's what the life flashing before your eyes in secular culture. As far as I can tell, the only source for this is the Catholic doctrine of the particular judgment. When you die, when we say that, yes, you're judged for all your decisions, what is generally understood is that you actually review every choice that you've ever made forever. Like, you become fully aware of them. You get a full memory of everything you did. And then you make, as a modern might say, or as a medieval might say, you discover that you have already made the choice for or against God, and there you go.
Wow. But modern theology?
Well, modern theologians have begun to, I think, discuss the idea whether it might be possible to repent, not while in hell, but that maybe right after you die, maybe there's one last chance to say no to your sin. It's a more hopeful theology. It's just not a point that the medievals really discussed. So, yeah, the idea is, but I think that the way to read Paolo and Francesca in this poem is that, we'll put it this way, the reason that we regret or repent of decisions like this in real life is usually that we get some new information about them that wasn't there when we made the choice. And the information could be something as simple as how it will feel. I think the way to understand the souls in the Inferno is that the reason that they don't change their minds once they're in hell is that they make the choice to go into hell knowing what it will consist of. And in that way, Paolo and Francesca are not surprised to discover that hell is so unpleasant. I probably used this image before, but a good metaphor for this might be to think of somebody who's at a party, has an argument with the host, and things get nasty, and then he decides to just storm downstairs into the basement. He's not enjoying the basement, and when he storms downstairs into the basement, he doesn't expect to enjoy himself down there. He knows it's going to be just a dark basement, and he'll sit there.
The pride, yeah.
And in a certain sense, we might say he wants to be out of the basement. And in a certain sense, we might say that he'd rather be upstairs, but not upstairs as it really is. He'd rather be upstairs in the sense that he'd rather not be suffering, but he doesn't really want to reconcile with the host. Mm-hmm. And that's what's actually necessary for him to go back upstairs.
I love that image. It makes so much sense. Yeah.
So that's Paolo and Francesca.
Okay.
For them to really reconcile with God, they have to actually accept that they shouldn't have done this. And they can't.
Mm-hmm. Remind me the title of this episode.
So our title, our Dante Daily, is that sin disguises itself as heaven. And I'm glad that you asked, because there's actually another point that I haven't covered. So I discovered this message in this canto on a rereading. So I'm going to give it to you now so you don't have to read twice. Consider what's going on in this circle. We have a bunch of people flying around in a circle because of a hurricane. They call the wind that is making them fly around love. The very last line of the Divine Comedy, not of the Inferno, will describe God as the love that moves the sun and the other stars. And what heaven will look like, spoiler alert, is lots of people essentially orbiting, rotating in spheres, in circles, talking about the love that moves them around. The very last thing that will happen in the poem is Dante will become turned like a wheel, these are the actual lines, by that love that moves the sun and the other stars. When I came back to Inferno after having read that, I thought, oh my gosh, this circle of hell is like a parody of heaven. Right? Because it's a bunch of people flying around in a circle talking about love for all eternity.
Oh, but
it's not
the right love.
And it's not real love. Because the real love is not this force, it's God.
Wow, he's so clever.
Yeah.
Clever guy.
So the Dante daily is that sin can disguise itself as heaven. And that's really the relevant point for our spiritual life. That that's what I
was talking about, right? That we can, if we don't guard our hearts, we will be deceived by our own feelings into thinking, well, this must be, that saying, how could something so good be so bad? And we can convince ourselves, we can be convinced of that when something feels so amazing. When you're loved, when you feel like you're being loved by somebody, by a person, in the wrong context is still wrong, is the wrong person. It's wrong all the way through.
Yeah. But because it has that, and I think this is really Dante's genius, he sees the really dangerous pleasure in these things is the intellectual or emotional pleasure. It's, he likes me too, she likes me too. It's that,
oh, wow, this person that I've been pining for likes me too.
And precisely because, there's a good context to that feeling, right? That feeling leads in its proper place to lots of good, noble marriages. But in the wrong place,
context, it leads to destruction and sorrow and so many awful
and that's really
things.
the point of this canto. It feels so good that we can love it more than right or wrong. That we can actually desire it more than we desire God. And that's what's dangerous.
Yeah. Thank you, my love.
Thank you, hon.
Thanks for listening to the Cam Books podcast. Follow us on Instagram at Cam Books.